I wanted to take a little romantic look back at the 1970s, one of my favorite decades, especially for Napa. And that was when the likes of Diamond Creek, Stony Hill, Mayacamas, Chapelet, Stag's Leap, Heights, all those glorious names were the pioneers. The owners were hands-on. You've heard these stories. They were planting the vineyards in their spare time on the weekends when they were free from their day jobs. They were figuring out how to make the wine. They figured out how to sell it, get it to market. And quite a few of the wines from that era are still kicking today. It's that long lens of hindsight that has put the 1970s on this beautiful sepia-toned pedestal for us today. In 1972, Chuck Wagner was starting Caymus vineyards with his parents, just as all those other pioneering wineries were getting started as well. As a youngster, he had a swimming hole behind the family house, and he had two responsibilities: show up for lunch, show up for dinner. He started working at age 11 for the princely sum of $1 an hour. His best friend in high school was David Abreu, and his neighbor was a guy named Andrei Telechev, who used to drop in on the family often. Chuck is as much Napa as anyone could possibly be. So I was thinking, how do you introduce someone like that? And I started thinking of all the change that has occurred in Napa since then. And Chuck was right there in the middle of it all. Yet a lot of the attention often goes to the big, overt changes. Say, for example, when a winery is sold to new owners, or when outside investment comes into Napa and changes something or adds something, and rightfully so. But sometimes we lose sight of equally successful but less overt paths of change and evolution that some people take. Chuck and his beloved Caymus might not seem to have changed much at all, right? He's a native son of Napa, he's a farmer with a family business, and Caymus is like clockwork every year, that awesome Cabernet in that Napa style that so many of us love. But then I realized Chuck didn't get to this level of success with a family business by not evolving or changing. Conundrum, Imolo, Mersolé. And Caymus didn't make Wine of the Year honors twice from this magazine, the only wine to do that, by not changing and not evolving. Slow and steady is just as dynamic when you take time to look at the results. Every time I catch up with Chuck, he's got a long list of projects that he's working on, ideas that he's ruminating over, and things that he wants to do both in Napa and outside. He's very much the embodiment of change and evolution in Napa's wine industry, and I'd argue that he's still pioneering now. You just haven't seen all the results yet. With that in mind, I would argue that he deserves 15 minutes of your attention, so please welcome our 2007 Distinguished Service Award winner, the owner and winemaker for Wagner Family Wines, Chuck Wagner.
So I think I was asked by Marvin Shanken to present a wine. He said a wine of your choice, of all the wines you have, your choice. And speak for 15 minutes about whatever you'd like to speak about. So that's why I'm here, and it's exciting for me. Also want to say that I'm elated to be here and see old friends I haven't seen for a couple of years. I think you're all experiencing the freedoms and how wonderful. It feels a little bit like yesteryear. Love it. So with that, I'm going to begin with, let's see, a couple of photos, an overview of what I'm going to speak about. First of all, this is the wine that we're presenting today. Of all the wines we've produced, the 40th 2012 vintage Caymus Napa Valley was an extremely successful wine for us. It happens to be our 40th vintage. That's one good thing, but it was a great year, another. It was something that went into the market, and surprising to me that, because we made a lot of wine that year, the wine sold right through. The wine did taste and perform well in the marketplace, and has basically been off the market for a long time. Many people out there love this wine, many of you, and I think it's a nice time to reflect and see how it's aging. It also expresses, I think, the character of Caymus Cabernet precisely. Every year we make a similar wine, at least we try, but if you were to line all of the Napa Valleys up, this would probably be the star of the show. And it's Caymus Napa Valley 2012 40th. So you've all, not all, but some of you have been to Napa Valley. This is, it's a sign that's been up since I was a kid. It is a wonderful valley, about 3 miles wide and 30 miles long. It's over 560 wineries today. Now it's monoculture grapes, and Cabernet Sauvignon is about half of that 36,000 acres of the valley floor. And of course, it's most renowned for Cabernet Sauvignon, the Napa Valley is. My heritage does go back. Both my mom and dad families were in the wine business before Prohibition. This is my great-grandfather with a big, heavy mustache, and to his side is a person who looks like me. That's his son. That's my great-uncle, Lester Stice. And with that, my mom, my dad, and myself, I'm going to speak a little bit more about my folks. But this was the motley crew that started Caymus and actually went to work in 1971. Loved my parents dearly, and I can tell you that the relationship was, it's the best father-son, mother-son relationship I've ever seen. And never an argument, and true love between us. Today, I've got two children of my four working with me side by side. Glad to say they're really taking the reins in a big way. We're all so busy. We can't even have lunch together at times, but it's Jenny and Charlie, both accomplished winemakers, and they also like the vineyard like I do. Napa Valley, I talked to James about this a little bit, that, where are things going? And I think single vineyard expressions, that have individual expressions of wine, if you will, that come from, say, different parts of the valley, different sub-appellations. And while I think that's important, and I think it's correct to a degree, Caymus is a blend of several areas. So of the 15 sub-appellations of Napa, about 8 of which is where we derive the grapes for the wine you're having, from the south to the north. Usually hillsides that are sloped, or mountaintops that are eroded, or gravelly soils along the creekways, anywhere where vines can stress. You know that Cabernet Sauvignon, as my dad used to say, grows like a weed. So if you put it on fertile soil, it makes a tremendously large vine and big canopy, and you end up with this pyrazine, green bell pepper character if you don't watch out. So it's got to be the soils that Cabernet can grow in that really produce the top wines. Cabernet looks like blueberries. It's a beautiful crop, and it's loose clusters like this. It can withstand rain more than other varieties before it starts to rot. And this is something I'm going to speak about later, and that is how we have changed some of our winemaking practices to produce wines from riper grapes. And I think the photos show that. A little bit of wrinkling on the outside berries. Some people call that orange peel. It's funny, years ago we used to have our grapes and you'd put them in your hand, and the turgor, the stiffness was hard, and it would bounce on your hand. And these days, when we harvest, you can take a cluster and lay it on your hand or bounce it on your hand, and it's soft. And I think that equates to a soft style wine, actually. By then, the berries seeds are brown. We've reduced the amount of juice inside the berry by 20-25%. The tannins in the skins have changed, no longer bitter, but more a textural component that goes into the wine. So that chalky, fine, sometimes considered chocolate-type cacao character. Our team, and part of what I'm going to talk about is our foundation, but I took over winemaking in 1984 and did it alone for many years, but always bringing my dad the wines, presenting them, and he'd give me his 2 cents. He was good. And So today I've got, I'm 70, and about 10, 15 years ago, I figured, well, we better engage a larger team so that should I drop off the edge of the earth, that Caymus might survive and produce a similar wine that we have. And so with that, our team is 6 people currently. Charlie and Jenny, of course, Harvest, Duhigg, yes, her name is Harvest. She's got a wine of her own, by the way. She's a very top winemaker gal out of Napa. Luis Rodriguez, who's our director of winemaking, who's the fellow with the vest on, and Berna Rodriguez is not shown in this, is the newest member to our winemaking team. So everything we do is tasted blind. We make our notes. We score our wines just like we're James Molesworth. And we have a lot of fun doing it. Our tastings are usually 10 wines at a set, and we do this once or twice a week, depending on what we're tasting. Again, Charlie, Jenny, and myself, and this is at Caymus Tasting Room, so if you're out that way, please stop by. This setting is typical. It's outside in the garden. We were doing this before COVID, but it just works out. It's just beautiful to have a glass of wine and a nice landscape area like that. The wine you're having, I hope you like it. It expresses Caymus how I see it should be expressed, which is round, rich, textural, bounding with flavor. Easy to come up with descriptors about the wine, spice notes, coffee, chocolate, vanilla, all kinds of descriptors. I was even asked one time by a consumer, so when in the process do you add the chocolate? I took it as a compliment. But I think there's 2 sides, simple sides to wine. One is textural. It's the richness, it's the tannin. It really does well with the taste of that between a bite of food. But beyond that, I think the flavor components are also important. And you'll find that in Caymus, we have both flavor and texture. And what I have to say today would be incomplete without speaking about my mom and dad a little bit. As I mentioned, they're both raised in Napa Valley along the Napa River. They were married. They farmed Caymus, 70-acre ranch. All my childhood. The main tractor on the property was the 1940s Caterpillar D4, and that tractor remained to be the main machine for the ranch until 1970, when my dad got a good deal on an Alice Chalmers 40 horsepower wheel tractor with power steering. But I don't think times were easy for my mom and dad, and I think that's why I was given an offer. And the offer was, I started college. My mom and dad wanted to have a talk with me, to sit down at the table, and this was back in the day when kids weren't talked to by parents like we talk to our kids nowadays. It was more about, it was kind of scary actually. Why? What did I do? But my dad said, Chuck, your mother and I would like to start a small commercial winery if you'll join us. And if you don't, we're going to sell the property and move to Australia. So it's a lightweight, my father's a very direct person. He didn't mince words himself, so. I immediately said yes, went to work in November 1971 alongside my father and one other man, and we pruned 4 months our vineyard, those 55 acres that included some Cabernet Sauvignon. Got to know my dad as a co-worker, and it was a tremendous time. With that, my mom lived to her 98th year, my father to his 90th year. We also like to mention that my dad had wine twice a day, always a man of moderation, and never saw him inebriated. But we had calculated that in his lifetime he had consumed over 3,000 gallons of wine. Looking back, we were quiet people, living in a vineyard 2 miles east of a quiet town called Rutherford, right in the middle of Napa Valley. Creek out back, Con Creek, and idyllic childhood for a kid and a dog, fishing pole. It was simple times with a chicken coop and a clothesline, and would shoot a jackrabbit, and my mom would fricassee it. Those were really great days, So also, when we started our business, I think there was not a ready market for wine. I think hippies had credited wine as being natural and good, and the wine and food culture had yet to arrive. So it was a slow go at the very beginning. It was far different than Napa Valley today, where 3.5 million visitors annually visit. But regardless, we went ahead with our business in establishing Caymus. We ended up releasing our first vintage, 1972, 250 cases that sold for $4.50 a bottle. And it took some effort to sell that wine. But my dad sold that wine down to 9 bottles. We had 9 bottles for family consumption, so I don't have any 1972, and if any of you know about some 72 out there, please let me know. I'd love to have a bottle. Things went well, and we sure loved what we were doing. We paid the bills, and we felt lucky. And then in 1975, Randy Dunn came to work at Caymus. He was a graduate of UC Davis. Smart guy, good guy, and he brought a lot to the table. He was not only smart and good for us, bringing more professionalism, but also he was not afraid to work. So I remember one year he and I together pruned a block of vines, and I was impressed because Randy was not afraid to get out there. I forgot to mention, when we started Caymus, my father was 60, my mother was 57, I was 19. My dad was not afraid to get out and prune vines for 4 months at the age of 60. Pretty awesome. So Randy, my mom served lunch for the work crew, small work staff that we had, and Randy had a seat at the table. And Randy was never a man to mince words, so my mom served stinky cheese, which I love. We were raised with stinky cheese, and Randy said, "I don't see how you can eat that stinky stuff." So a few years later, Randy began to appreciate good stinky cheese, and he became a family member and stuck with Caymus for 8 or 9 years before starting Dunn Vineyards up on Hell Mountain. He's successful at that, still a good friend to this day. But in fact, many other people worked at or started their business at Caymus. David Abreu was mentioned. We worked our early years. David learned to prune vines with my father, just like I did. Frank Altamira, Austin Hope, Dick Grace, Mac McDonald, and this list goes on. And I'm not sure quite why this all occurred, but we sure made many friends in that process. It was good. Our first production year of 1972, we had 3,000 square foot building. We had gift barrels that were gifted to my father from Bull U and Inglenook that probably came along with the bugs of those wineries. And also the fermenters were made by an Italian fella out of Healdsburg. His name was Al Bellagio. They were redwood tanks. You put a plank on the top and punch down, and they looked more like a hot tub of the day than a fermenter. But we used those for years. It was great. It was great. At the time, we had 55 acres of grapes, as I mentioned, and all of it was dry farmed. So what that means is there's no additional irrigation water given to the vine, only the winter, the water that comes into the soil at that point from the previous winter. And Napa Valley typically doesn't have rain from April through October. It's a very dry place. It's also one of the reasons it's such a good place for growing grapes. We have little rot, incidents of rot, and that's tremendous. It's also probably why I think Napa Valley grows fantastic tomatoes. So we still use the practice of dry farming. We think it's important. We do get smaller berries. There's some believe that over-irrigation of a vine is like putting a water hose in your fermenter. It dilutes things, and I think there's some truth to that. I don't know, many of the adages or the things you've heard about wine or theories are not always true. But we ended up making Caymus Napa Cabernet from the very beginning of my father's methods of homemade wine. That was our first phase. Our second phase, we learned what Bordeaux was about. I had no idea what Bordeaux was when we started our business. And we liked those wines and saw that they were electric in the market. So the second phase of Napa Cabernet that we produced was trying to emulate Bordeaux. I think it's fair to say that many winemakers also were influenced by Bordeaux. But a third phase was about to happen. I think it began in the 1990s, and that was to produce a riper style of Cabernet. It was going to be thought to maybe not age as well, and it would taste better right out of the blocks. But I think that there's other reasons to produce that wine. I think that the wines are gorgeous, and I love them. I think also that people like the wines and the style. You don't have to wait. You're tasting a wine that is over 10 years old, and it's made in that style. You tell me if the wine's not aging up. And older the wine, better the wine never worked for me anyway. So with that third style, the riper style that were produced from the grapes that were slightly wrinkled, we've been doing that since 2001. And ever since then, it's been a very similar technique. And I have been asked, are we going to have a change in style? Are we going there as an industry or as a winery? And I think that it's true that innovation is always part of what we live with, probably in all businesses. Wine is no different. I've been inspired to see how Napa has been able to change with the times and evolve and create better wines. I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. But with all the change in whether it's politics and or regulation or weather, there's probably going to be some changes ahead of us. Nothing's in the works right now, but I think it's going to happen. Cabernet Sauvignon, probably for the rest of my life, will be the most important wine we produce. But I think it's hard to say when that's going to happen. I think maybe to a degree it's happening elsewhere in the world. I've heard. And so while Napa Valley has been totally planted to grapes and over 500 wineries have appeared, Caymus has become a name recognized for the production of Napa Cabernet Sauvignon. Years ago, I heard Corinne Metzelopoulos speak about Chateau Margaux. I was struck how the brand was the star, not the winemaker or any person. I heard this during a time when Napa was gaining its own fame and celebrity winemakers were being shown on the covers of magazines. I kept coming back to Caymus is not about me or my kids. We will come and go, but Caymus could and should remain long-term. And by the way, the success of Caymus includes people outside of the company in our community at large. They've had a hand in establishing Caymus. For you in the audience who have consumed or sold Caymus wines, thank you. You are the ones who built the reputation of Caymus. And as for me, I remain an avid wine consumer. I have never fallen out of love with wine. I enjoy my life work as a farmer and winemaker in Napa and several other locations in California. California is a special state. Been in the news, much negative news, but it is a wonderful state. I feel California has a very bright future. Thank you. Consider the cold Pacific coast along its edge from Mendocino down to Santa Barbara, and how from west to east it warms, more or less maritime temperatures. And I have a theory. Theory is if you have similar weather conditions and you have similar soils, you can make similar wine. And I think that's where California is going these days. I'm impressed with some of the wines being produced out of different regions that I didn't know much about. Some of the wines we're making actually from areas that I had 10 years ago didn't know about. And I think Paso Robles is a real, spotlight for me. I think that they've had recent successes, and I think that's indicative of where California is going. They're making some great wines down there. It's going to happen here and there throughout the state. It's a great state. Is it getting warmer? Yeah, I guess it is. And are we seeing the effects of it? Personally, no, not what we do. I'm not seeing the effects. So I've been growing grapes and making wine, hard to say this, but for over 50 years. It's amazing to me. I look back at my past, and besides having 4 children and 11 grandchildren, the simple things make my day. To me, being rich means having more tomatoes than you can eat. Wine Spectator, what can I say? You have brought the wine world together. You've enhanced our lives as vintners, wine consumers, told countless memorable stories, and have tasted and scored all wines blindly. And you have done so much more. Thank you to the Wine Spectator, and especially thank you to those in the audience for loving wine. It's tremendous. I hope you've enjoyed the 2012 Napa Cabernet. It was, as I mentioned, a hallmark wine for us, something we're very proud of. And even though Special Selection is our top wine, with more extravagance and tannin and ageability, I think the Napa is what we're best known for. It is the basis of our reputation, and we consider it our bread and butter wine. So with that, thank you very much.